Hello and welcome to Engineering with Rosie Live. I have a fantastic guest with me today, Paul Martin from Spitfire Research. So Paul is a chemical engineer with quite a few decades experience developing all kinds of technologies, and now he has his own company, Spitfire Research. They are helping investors and innovators to make sense of the energy transition, and especially people that want to develop new chemical processes. So Paul, did I roughly get that right? And anything you want to add quickly?
You got it. You got it right. I do spend a lot of my time getting paid to tell people no, which is, but no, that's not going to work. But here's what might. So yeah, it's fun. Matches my personality.
Yeah. Well, I wrote that in the description for the video that the theme of the day is no holds bar, cutting through the. I usually try not to swear on the channel, but you can. I do swear in real life, but yeah, I know a lot of Americans are offended by that, so I usually try to avoid. But yeah, I mean, no nonsense, just engineering. Theory applied, and you will brutally take down technologies that you don't agree with. So I guess that is the theme. So having said that, welcome to everybody that is watching, and please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and any questions that you have for Paul, because yeah, I've got a few things in mind to talk about, but in general, one of the great things about Paul is that he doesn't need a lot of time. He doesn't need to have a 50 slide deck to answer a question for you. So feel free to ask about nearly anything to do with energy transition you have a strong opinion on. Maybe actually like literally everything.
Maybe too many things.
Yeah.
Tell me what you really think. That's what they're always saying.
Yes, exactly. But I do. It's interesting what you said about you're paid to tell people no. That's my thing with my consulting too. Like, I'm going to try and break your technology. That's my goal. And if someone doesn't want to be told no, or they don't want their new energy technology broken, then I think that they're not serious. And I think that's a good screening tool for who you want to work with or not.
On my website for Spitfire Research, one of the things that it says is that if you've come looking for somebody that's going to wax poetic about how great your idea is, you're coming to the wrong place. You should go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think so. I've just brought up your website here. I think that's good to screen clients in that way. And it's one of the best things about working for yourself is that you don't have to, work on projects where you're already told the answer beforehand, and then, help an executive to make their business case work for some stupid thought bubble that they had. Yeah, yep. Not that ever happened to me in my past career, and I'm sure not to you either. But I posted on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, a poll about what topic people wanted to hear about. It's a bit different between the platforms, as always. So I asked direct air capture, waste to energy, petrochemicals, which you can see is what I voted for, least popular, and hydrogen. And so on most of the platforms, it was waste to energy that came out in front, and hydrogen varied a lot from most to actually in the end it ended up most popular on some of them. But I also had quite a few comments that people are sick of talking about hydrogen.
Me included. I'm very, very sick of talking about hydrogen. I wish that the hyperbole would die down so that I wouldn't have to quite so much.
I agree, and I will just say before we agree not to talk about it much more, I do get the impression that some of the more ridiculous applications for hydrogen are dropping off, and I'm also personally I'm coming more on board with some of the more suited things for hydrogen. But I don't know. Is that similar to what you see? Or
yeah, it's settling down a bit. I think I went to the World Hydrogen Congress in Rotterdam in the fall of last year, and I would say that 75% of the hyperbole that was going on there was actually a weird response to grids are hard, right? Grids are hard to build, therefore hydrogen. Or the other one was the other big one is people asking the wrong question and hence getting hydrogen as an answer. So the question they ask themselves is, we can't burn fossils anymore. What else can we burn? You know, and you can hear Eric Idle's character from Monty Python and the Holy Grail going, more witches, you know, more fossils. You know, somebody
Maybe
saying
that's a new W to E, witches to energy.
Exactly. And you know, the real question we need to ask ourselves, and the question I think you're constantly asking on your channel, which is fantastic, is we can't burn fossils anymore. How do we provide the energy services that we need without, you know, generating greenhouse gas emissions? And that's the crux of the whole thing. And the answer to that question is almost never hydrogen. It is hydrogen sometimes, but it's almost never, you know, wasting hydrogen as a fuel is almost never the right thing to do. And that's, you know, kind of enough said. And if people would listen to that, it'd be okay, but they don't. And they keep talking about how they're going to spend billions of public money on it. And that's what bugs me. Right. So
yeah, that's one thing that I carry on about a lot, is that we need to, you know, get the engineers involved more in discussion, because engineers are problem solvers. It's basically the definition of engineering, and that's what we need, is to look at problems and find solutions rather than take solutions and see what kinds of problems we can invent for them.
Yeah. Exactly. Walking around with a hammer, you're looking for nails, and that's the trouble. We've got this 10,000-year history of having this box on our head, you know, which is need heat, must burn something, and we have to get that off our heads, right? Because the future, it's not going to be quite so much burning of anything.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a good segue into waste to energy, which is a new kind of thing that we can burn. But let's first of all just put some viewer comments up. We've got David Montgomery, who's frequently in the live streams from Huntington Beach, California. We've got Mike Klein, who's from Calgary, he says in a later comment. We've got Tony Nags from the UK, Chris from Adelaide. Nice link, including even Europeans, which I think the time zone isn't that great. Jim Bob from Ireland, Joe Biles from Dallas, Texas. And all over. So
that's great.
That is a really nice mix. And I'm not a night owl at all, so I'm always like shocked to see people calling in from like midnight or 2 a.m. or whatever it must be in Europe at the moment.
I'm too old for that. I'm too old for that. I can't do that anymore.
Okay, so let's get started then on waste to energy. So I'll give my one sentence explanation of what it is, and maybe some of the issues that I would like to know more about, and you can weigh in. Waste to energy is taking garbage, burning it. You use that heat to drive a turbine, the same as, you know, it's similar to a coal power plant or something, but your fuel is garbage. And a little anecdote from when I lived in Denmark, people always talk about Denmark as environmental leaders, which is often true. And we sort our plastics into many different categories in Denmark. You got hard plastics, soft plastics, and then you sort the softs into different colors as well. And my expectation and assumption was that all this sorting of plastics is so that they can be recycled. And then I visited a waste to energy plant in Odense and found out that actually the sorting is because different kinds of plastic burn at different temperatures. And so if they have it sorted, then they can more precisely control the temperature of their garbage fire. And I was a little bit less diligent in my recycling sorting after that. But I mean, the big issue with waste to energy, I mean, it's really nice to not have landfill. You use waste. I mean, one thing that I learned as well about Denmark is that they quickly ran out of their own garbage and had to start buying it from Germany. You'd think you'd get garbage for free, but I mean, anytime that, you know, something starts out as a waste feedstock, once you need it, then you end up having to pay for it. That's, I think, a really good lesson for many other kinds of ideas in the energy transition that involve waste. But the other big thing is that it's a fossil fuel, which Denmark doesn't recognize. But there, I'll hand over to you, Paul, to explain, why it's a fossil fuel and whether it's overall good, overall bad, or I'm sure that there's some nuance that we can get into.
Sure. So I guess there's also kind of another wrinkle that I would put on it that people have been, I mean, it's been popular for 30 years, but it comes and goes, and it's coming back again. And that is that obviously burning garbage has, kind of a negative image. And so if they can burn garbage once removed by making something out of the garbage that then gets burned, then that, distances themselves from that stinky kind of bad image of burning garbage. And so what you're seeing is a resurgence of ideas like pyrolysis and gasification to make fuels, which you then burn later in vehicles or in other applications. And so they're kind of incineration once removed as well. And the other thing is that there's a good part to this and a bad part to this. So you've correctly identified the bad part, which is that in net heat energy terms, and by net I mean net of the energy that it takes to dry the garbage, to dry the waste material, municipal solid waste is a fossil fuel. I mean, its energy content is largely, if you're just to take a sample of municipal solid waste and burn it, and then figure out which isotopes of carbon are in there, and by so doing, figure out what's the old carbon that came from fossils and what's the new carbon that came from living things, you'd find that it's actually, it looks okay. The CO2 balance doesn't look so bad. But in terms of net energy, most of the energy, the lion's share of the energy, is coming from the fossil stuff that's in there. And that's true even if you try to remove it, which is why these waste energy schemes never want to remove the plastic. They want to leave as much in as possible. And this is bad in a couple ways. So one is obviously you're going to get fossil GHG emissions that are going to go to the atmosphere, which we really need to stop doing. I mean, we really need to stop doing that. The other part of it is, if you were to just landfill that plastic, those fossil GHG emissions would not go to the atmosphere. So if you were to look at it, I like to flip it on its head and look at it the other way. And that is to say, what's the cheapest post-consumer way to store fossil GHGs so that they're not emitted to the atmosphere? The answer to that question, 100%, is baling and burying waste plastic that's too dirty and too mixed to be recyclable. There's no question about it. I mean, all you have to do is put it in a hole that's dry and covered so there's light and oxygen can't get at it, and it will last for millennia. Mechanical properties break down, but it won't turn into CO2 and methane and stuff. It lacks the energy to do so, and so it'll just stay there forever. And burying stuff that stays there forever, it doesn't sound good. But air filling isn't really a great alternative to landfilling either, is it? Especially if it's fossil CO2 that we then have to, think about using direct air capture or something else insane to take back out of the atmosphere. Because honestly, we need to recover some of what we've already put in, much less put more in. But then that leaves the biogenic portion. Okay, so there's a big chunk of the mass, and unfortunately, a big chunk of the mass of water in waste that is from biomass. Whether that be shredded paper or yard waste or food waste or what have you. And that stuff has two nasty tendencies. One of them is when you throw it in a landfill, it makes methane, which is really bad. I mean, global warming potential 84 times that of CO2 on the 20-year time horizon. And the other is when you burn it or gasify it or do whatever you're going to do with it in order to convert it into energy, the CO2 that you produce is of biogenic origin. So it's going to go back into the atmosphere, and it's not going to raise the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere because it came out of the atmosphere in the recent past. So, long answer to the short question, waste to energy is good if it's biogenic waste and bad if it's plastic waste or heterogeneous municipal solid waste that's mostly plastic. And making hydrogen or making whatever, liquid fuels out of syngas or what have you, all of these wrinkles or these versions that you can do on this thing, they're all good or bad or middling, depending on the fossil CO2 content of the resulting energy, if you will. So it can be a greenwash, and it usually is a greenwash. It's an alchemy whereby people take a fossil energy source and transmute it into a biofuel. I've seen that many times.
Well, I've seen stories like Sweden is running out of garbage because they recycle everything, and they're talking about waste to energy and that, which I think is a stretch to consider it recycling. Like I said, Denmark does consider it a fossil fuel, and I know that in their net they know that they have to get rid of it. But I think that this is a little interesting piece of branding. This is a big waste to energy plant in Copenhagen, and I like that when you look it up on Google, it's calling itself a ski resort in Copenhagen, which
that's a really pretty building.
I mean the waste.
My mother-in-law loved that building. She thought that was really cool, and it kind of sells. You can trust
the Danes to make even like all of their power plants look nice. Where I lived in Denmark, you could see across the fjord, you could see a little it's a CHP, a combined heat power. I mean, most of all of this waste to energy is also providing heat for district heating in Denmark, so it's not too bad. But yeah, they've made it beautiful. You can ski on it. You can rock climb up the side of it. It's I mean, it is a good little bit of branding, but doesn't change the fact that CO2 is going into the atmosphere. I wanted to ask you, Paul, have you heard of anybody that's planning to put CCS onto waste to energy? I haven't seen any projects like that yet.
Well, not really waste to energy, but on biomass sourced energy. And the trouble with using CCS is problematic in a lot of ways, but one of the big ways that it's problematic when you're talking about biomass is that you get twice as much CO2 per joule as you would if you were burning. So the downside there is if you're paying for waste disposal in the form of burying CO2, you really don't want to start with something that's going to generate twice as much of that waste per joule as if you're going to start with something else. Another piece that is interesting, though, is that there's another method of carbon sequestration that I think actually makes a lot of sense. So there are two things that we do a lot of in the world that need liquid fuels, and they're going to need liquid fuels for decades, and that's aviation and shipping. So transoceanic ships and transoceanic aircraft, they're going to need liquid fuels for a long time. And people are talking about using ammonia or trying to use hydrogen or making liquid fuels by trying to reverse burning by unburning CO2 with hydrogen that's made from water using electricity. And you can imagine all of those steps they're very lugubrious. They're really, you're trying to dig things out of the ditch and put them back up on top of the cliff, and it's very energetically ridiculous and intensive, and that means it's going to be expensive. But if you start with biomass and you're really clever about it, there's a couple things you can do. One thing that you can do is you can make some biochar. Now it has to be biomass. People trying to take fossil materials or waste plastic and then produce char from it by pyrolysis and then call it biochar. That's, again, greenwashing. But real biochar, like charcoal that's made from biomass sources, has a couple virtues. One of them is that the carbon in it is virtually non-degradable. It degrades, but only at over tens of millennia. And the other thing is that it takes all of the inorganics that came with the biomass that were basically mined out of the soil by the plants, and it puts them back. So, I like the idea of making biochar and then taking the syngas or the bio-oil or the combination of the two things that comes off the top of these processes and using those as the source material to make aviation fuels or shipping fuels. Because, first of all, you're getting the energetic benefit of the biomass, right? You're not burning it all to make CO2 and then unburning it to make a fuel again. You're starting with something that has some energetic value. And the other thing is that you end up returning that inorganic content to the soils from whence it came in a way that doesn't impair the soils, but can actually improve the soil's productivity. So, overall, what's not to like, aside from the fact that it's expensive? I mean, about a third, 30%-ish of something like corn stover that's fed to a pyrolysis or gasification unit is going to turn into char. And that means that third or 30% or thereabouts of that feed material is no longer available to use as energy. So, most pyrolysis projects back in the 1980s and then in the 2000s and 2010s, they were looking at burning char because they wanted the energy in order to run the pyrolysis and in order to get their energy balance to look better. And we did lots and lots of projects at my former employer trying to do these sorts of things with all sorts of, feed materials and algae and lemna and sugarcane bagasse and corn stover and wheat straw and rice husks and whatever, a million sorts of things that people sometimes throw away and sometimes burn, and would be nice to turn into some energy of some kind. So yeah, my thinking is it's best to, if we're going to do that with biomass, it's best to try to make things that need liquid fuels rather than trying to replace electricity or the like, or making hydrogen for that matter, because we can make hydrogen well enough from water and electricity as long as we're smart about how we use it. If we don't burn it, then and we use it as a chemical, then that's a no regret use of any green hydrogen we think we can afford to make.
There's a lot there. I did pull up some things related to some things that were a while ago now, but in terms of CCS, you mentioned that there is some for bioenergy in general, and that Drax is probably the main example, at least the most famous example of that. They are underway with their addition of CCS to their. They have a plant, used to be a coal power plant, now it's a bioenergy plant, but they are also in the news again for, and I've heard people very passionately and convincingly argue both sides of this, but it periodically does pop up that their sustainable biomass that they're getting, they get a lot from North America, I know, and periodically you see these investigations that show that, I don't know, like whole trees or virgin forest is being, turned into pellets to burn in Drax. So there's always that risk. At least that's my issue with biofuels as the answer for everything, is that when you massively scale up biofuels, increase the amount of it will increase the amount people want to pay for it. When there's more demand for it, then there is this big, you quickly run out of actual waste that you can use, and you start pretending other things are waste.
That's absolutely true. And so I'm definitely not a biofuels for everything person. I think all land transport is going electric. I think nearshore and inshore shipping is going electric. I think, short range aviation is going electric. And that's all good. And that leaves those long range shipping and aviation that need the liquid fuels. And that's where we should focus the biomass, and that there's plenty of biomass to do that with. So, for instance, 10% of gasoline in Canada and the United States is ethanol. And by
that's weird, right?
Easy, high yield. Yeah, it is weird. But by 2 easy, high yield steps, you can convert ethanol into sustainable aviation fuel. And there's a company called LanzaJet, which is a spinoff of a company called LanzaTech, that is actually doing that. Now, they hope to make their ethanol by fermentation of syngas as well, so they're a little strange that way. But if you start with ethanol, you dehydrate it to make ethylene, and then you make short polymers of ethylene, you can make really perfect jet fuel. And it's not cheap. None of these things are cheap, but it makes a whole lot more sense than any of this e-fuel stuff that I've been hearing about. So, I think
e-fuels will be for people that want to keep their classic cars and don't want to convert them to electric. And I've got no problem with like $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 supercars in the future continuing to use e-fuels if they want to spend the amount of money that it takes to do that.
I converted my classic car to an electric twice.
But I think not everyone will want to do that. I'm okay with it, like tiny little fraction of, because people always latch on to extreme cases, right? They're always like, oh, net zero, that means that, you know, we have to solve the Sydney to London, you know, in a single flight. We have to solve that. And the same with transport. It's like, oh, well, okay, the energy transition means that there'll be no more classic cars. And it's like, well,
This
whatever,
excessive,
you know, you can
this
you can have
excessive
expensive
focus,
e-fuels for that. Yeah.
this excessive focus on the so-called hard to decarbonize sectors is really, it's whataboutism, and it's also a predatory delay strategy, right? So instead of working on the 95% of the economy that's actually comparatively easy to decarbonize, where we have technology and a path to decarbonize it, they focus on the remaining 5% that'll be hard, where we have to make some sacrifices and pay a lot to do it, and say, look, the whole darn thing is impossible. See how hard it is to get this last 5%. And it's like, come on, guys, 5%, it's crazy. And then the other part of it, of course, is, you know, the late David Mackay of Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air fame. And that document is still available, and people should read it if they haven't read it. It's really worth reading, even though there are problems with the methodology that was used, because it confuses work with heat and so on, as if they're worth the same, which drives me bonkers. But anyway, what he said was, every little bit helps, but only a little. And we really need the big bits, right? And so we really shouldn't be worried about classic cars, or even, you know, how to manage the 2 weeks of the cult Dunkelflaute. You know, we really shouldn't be worried about that stuff. That stuff will take care of itself, even if we have to burn fossils for that for the next 3 decades. You know, it misfocus, you know, and it delays the transition, which makes the fossil guys really happy. So
yeah, I totally agree with you, except for I think I don't necessarily, I'm not maybe quite as cynical as you. I actually blame the net zero slogan brand partially for this, because I know that, you know, I work a lot with engineers and people who think like engineers, and as soon as you get people on a problem, you immediately zoom to some sort of detail at the end that you know is going to be hard. And I think that, net zero, like zero is the main part of that. It immediately focuses people's minds on the very hardest thing to do. And so for that reason, I think like it was really good that it got people, you know, focused on, oh, okay, we need to be at zero at around 2050, but there's too much nuance lost that, you know, the path to get to zero matters more actually than the time when we get to zero. You'd be much better off getting to 90% reduction in, you know, in 15 years time, and then taking a long time to get rid of the last little bit. That will be better for the climate and probably fit more naturally with technology development than, than not worrying, not doing the easy stuff, like you said, not doing the easy stuff. And
a smart person, I forget who it was, but a smart person on my LinkedIn, you know, among my LinkedIn connections, was talking about the time value of carbon. And I think that's a really good way to put it. You know, we talk about the time value of money, and we understand that really well.
Yes,
we really should be talking about the time value of carbon, because the longer it's in the atmosphere, you know, the more the integrated effect will be. And we really should be doing the easy things that we can do quick and cheaply first. And, you know, electric vehicles, LED lighting, energy efficiency, and the like are really the things that we should be pouring our effort and energy into. And of course, also decarbonizing electricity, which is necessary to do the whole rest of decarbonization, because 90% of decarbonization is going to happen by electrification. So, long story short, but I think people have to be really careful about the magical thinking, and I think a lot of the waste to energy stuff is magical thinking. It's oh, look, we've got there's big piles of energy laying around that nobody, including all the engineers, have thought about. It's like, no, there aren't. Not really.
Let's wrap up waste to energy now with some comments from viewers, and then I think it would be interesting to talk about other kinds of waste, because people, one thing I've learned from doing this communication stuff that I've been doing the last few years is that people hate waste. They like really, really, really hate it. They hate waste more than they like I don't know, cost-effective solutions. But anyway, let's do the comments and then we can move on to some stuff related to that. So at the start of this section, Matthew Schroer says, very interested in waste energy, has one 15 k's from my home. Be interested to know if you can smell it, because I maybe don't have a sensitive sense of smell or something, but I know some people that say that whenever they land in Copenhagen, they're like, oh, you can smell the garbage because you're burning it in the middle of town. But I thought they actually did a pretty good job of not. And then somebody else said, where is it? Oh, yeah. So your delusions are not reality says, I thought waste energy meant the energy from wasted heat, not energy from garbage. And I guess that's, that would be waste energy or wasted energy, but not waste to energy. But
yeah,
I'd be interested
to
see if a lot of people
converting waste materials of one sort or another into energy, whereas using energy that would otherwise be wasted is just energy efficiency with a different name. So, and I love energy efficiency. It's pretty great. Now, it's not uniformly good because, of course, if you spend 1 million joules to save 1 joule a year, you're not doing anybody any favors, right? So embodied energy matters too.
Yeah. And I mean, the economics matters too, I think. The other thing is that there's a lot of waste heat in the world. There's,
so much.
Yeah, and we're never there's no shortage of it. This is not in short supply. So people then, I guess this is me segueing on to these other kinds of waste that people hate argument. There's so many, you see so many new inventions it has to be inventions because it's not new things, but ways to take waste energy and use it for something else. So, like you see that with a lot of thermal energy storage, that's like, it's a battery. We get electricity out and it's 95% efficient. And you're like, okay, yeah, it's 95% efficient because you assume that all the waste heat from your turbine is going to get used. But, there are a lot of combined heat and power units, little ones around Europe, especially. Some grids rely on it, or some locations rely more on it than others. Like Poland is pretty, that's how they get their heat.
They're really hard to build where you don't have them already, but where they exist, those heating networks are really wonderful where they exist. And we've got a bunch of them in downtown Toronto. And one of the really cool things that we've got that's a bit of a geographic oddity is we do a substantial amount of the air conditioning, which is really a big deal and getting worse every year in Toronto because of the humidity in the summertime. What we do is we provide a substantial amount of the cooling required for the big office towers in downtown Toronto from deep lake water from Lake Ontario, which comes in at about 4 degrees C. And that water then is fed into the domestic drinking water network. So what we do is we take our drinking water, warm it up a little bit by cooling down all the buildings downtown. And that way we're not mining the lake and raising the lake's temperature. We're just warming up our drinking water, which really doesn't need to be 4 degrees C, honestly. So it's a pretty good idea. And of course, the people who are working on those networks are doing now heat pumping and heat storage things. There's this really cool project called the Well, where they're building a giant tank underneath a new office and condo tower that they're going to be using as a thermal store for district heating. So those things are really cool. And the other thing is, if you look at a Sankey diagram of energy services, and another thing that drives me around the bend is people talking about primary energy, like Václav Smil as an example. You just want to punch that guy in the head all the time. Because he's making that primary energy fallacy argument, which is we get so many petajoules of energy from fossil fuels, and in a decarbonized future, we have to replace all that with renewables. And the answer to that is no. We have to replace about 1/3 of that because 2/3 of it is wasted. It's rejected energy. Exactly. So
yeah, just brought up a Sankey diagram for those who I don't think everybody knows what one is. You take energy. Where it comes in and where it goes. And what we're talking about with the difference between primary energy and final energy is, there's a lot of energy in a fossil fuel, but you can't turn most of that into electricity. You lose about, I don't know,
two-thirds of it, 40% of it in a super efficient in a super efficient combined cycle gas turbine plant. But in your average, power plant, it's 70% of the energy is wasted. And there are a lot of processes that we do, especially in the chemical process industry, like distillation is a perfect example, or drying. And every joule of energy that you put into the reboiler at the bottom of a distillation column, not every joule, but almost every joule that you put in the bottom in the reboiler comes out in the condenser, just colder. And so it's natural that you, in a future where we're making energy in the form of work, in the form of electricity, thermodynamic work or exergy, we're going to use a heat pump to take the heat out of the condenser and pump it back into the reboiler. And that's logical. I mean, it just makes sense. And in fact, in a sense, you don't even really need to do that. You can even, in a lot of applications, you can use the process vapor as the working fluid for your refrigeration cycle in your heat pump. And they call that mechanical vapor recompression. And that can have a really excellent coefficient of performance and, can move heat around really extremely effectively. So a lot of this waste heat in a decarbonized future goes away, and we don't need to worry about replacing it with electricity because we just will use our energy smarter. And we're getting higher grade energy. We're getting pure exergy in the form of electricity in the future, whereas we're kind of stuck with heat. Petroleum and natural gas and coal, they're proxies for heat, not work. So
yeah, and I think that, I mean, I personally don't find it that useful to compare the efficiency of fossil fuel energy compared to something that's directly generating electricity. That's something that you hear a lot of people who work in similar areas to us saying, renewables will win because they're so much more efficient than fossil fuels because you're not wasting all your energy as heat. But one, I don't think that it's true because you only capture 20-something% of sunlight that falls on a solar panel, so that's more inefficient than burning coal. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's relevant either. It's like if we,
I don't know. I get the point.
I think it's a mistake. Like people make it. It's definitely a mistake if you say, we've got this much primary energy in our energy system and we need to replace it with that much renewables. That's just absolutely wrong, and you're going to be 3 times out on all your estimates if you make that mistake. But other than that, I think if you just focus mostly on the amount of energy you need to use, again, if you focus on the problem that you've got to solve, which is transporting things around and using electricity in your home, then I think that problem goes away. But
focusing on energy services is the right thing, right? And so if you want to put heat into a reboiler and take it out of a condenser, the way we've done it in the past is burn fuel to make steam to run the reboiler and then use cooling water to dump heat into the local river or stream to run the condenser. And in a decarbonized future, we'll just be smarter about it. We have electricity, we'll use electricity, and we'll waste a lot less energy in doing so. And that's great. It's going to make the transition a third to a half as hard as the Smills of the world are trying to tell us it will be.
Okay, we've got a couple of really good comments that I just want to put up because they're actually some really, really clever ones. So Mike Klein says, look in your rearview mirror and look at the traffic oncoming. Nearly every single vehicle has a beautifully designed homage to energy inefficiency, the grill and radiator. And that's a really good point. And it's, in the wintertime when you're blasting the heating, it used to be, before electric cars, that was like absolutely guilt-free energy. You can be, if you prefer the temperature 30 degrees Celsius, then you can do that and not feel bad for wasting any energy. But in an electric car,
except in my Priuses, I started buying Priuses in 2008. And the problem with them in a cold place like Canada is that because the engine shuts off, and there's no grill blocking, they don't have levers to shut off the grill. The engines overcool and the efficiency drops. So, you have to actually be careful. And in fact, in 2008, when I installed an electric preheater that I could use to warm the engine up off the grid so I would get better fuel efficiency in the winter. A lot of people don't think that engine vehicles have range loss in winter, but they really do. Canada will teach you about that.
But of course you would be going for the little efficiency gains. That's something that I've learned with my professional work. I've recently started working with a lot of process engineers, and everything is every bit of any chemical plant or anything you go into is so damn complicated. You know, like you can describe the reaction they're trying to achieve in a couple of sentences, and in the lab it's like a beaker with a couple of things happening, and then you go into a plant and there are pipes going everywhere, and there are heat exchangers, and there are, you know, now we're recovering. It's just efficiency is the name of the game, whether it's for energy or it's for, you know, any of the feedstocks that you're using that you can if you can reuse any chemical in your process, then you do.
A lot of the heat integration, you know, some of the heat integration is absolutely necessary in order to make the energy efficiency of the process good. But some of it actually is the kind of booby prize that you get for using fossil fuels, because you're going to burn you know, methane as an example, and you're going to get really, really hot flue gas, and you might use that to heat up the hottest thing in your process, but then you got a bunch of hot flue gas that's still leaving the thing. So now you got to put a heat recovery steam generator in the flue to not let that stuff go away. And of course, if you used an electric heater, you would just put in exactly the amount of heat that the hot process needed, and you wouldn't bother with this flue, and you wouldn't do any of that heat recovery stuff. So in a decarbonized future, industrial heating gets simpler, and capital cost drops. But of course, the operating cost goes up. So it's, unfortunately, it's not a win-win. It's, you know, until you can do that business with the heat pumping that I was talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll get on to industrial heat. I'm not sure if I'll have time, but here's another comment that made me laugh from what the hell, I guess. The trees that form the coal only captured and stored about 1% of sunlight. So yeah, that's in response, I guess, to my statement that, you know, solar panel only converts 20% of sunlight. Well, yeah, a leaf is even less efficient, and yeah, coal power or gas at the end of the day is a store of sunlight. Yeah.
Photosynthesis got to about it got to about 2% efficient after 1 billion years of evolution. We can already beat that by an order of magnitude. So we're doing pretty good, in my views, that 20% efficiency, collecting a free resource that's limitless. You know, anytime anybody talks about fusion power and asks me what I think about fusion, I always tell them there's a perfectly good fusion reactor, you know, at a safe distance of 93 million miles or so, and it's got 1 billion years left on its warranty, and we should just use that.
Yeah.
Indirectly, the wind's good too. You know, they're complementary.
Another couple of just comments about you, Paul. Where was one of them? Oh yeah. So John Way says, "Why I've followed Paul on X and LinkedIn for a while. You just want to punch him in the head." Lol. And then this one here from Rottweiler. I came here for the cool science, but I can't stop staring at Paul's guitar. It's beautiful. So maybe if you can say a couple of words about your...
That is unfortunately, it's not an original. It's a Chinese one.
But you play?
It's a Gretsch 12-string, in case anybody's interested.
Yeah, right.
It just sounds gorgeous. There's a bunch more guitars on the other.
Well, maybe you can play something for us next time. I play the clarinet, which nobody ever thought was cool, so I won't get any credit for that.
My son and my daughter both played the clarinet. My daughter is actually studying music education at university. She plays the violin, and she plays violin at quite a high level. So yeah, we're very pleased with her.
Yeah, it's nice. I don't know. I think you need something like that to really balance out just the relentless. Engineering can feel a bit relentless in your brain and changes your personality. And in certain ways, if you only do that, I think it's really, of all the careers, you know, you probably always need some balance. But I think with engineering, that it is important to have some sort of creative and just like kind of long, where you can just get in the flow and the zone and not think really. That's important.
For sure. And, you know, my problem is that I was always a bit scatterbrained that way. I was interested in all sorts of things, and then had to figure out which of those I wanted to do for a living. And how I got into chemical engineering was actually chemical photography back before digital photography, when you had to do things in the dark room. That's what got me into chemical engineering. I automated some darkroom equipment because I wanted to do the creative fun part where you're figuring out how to make the image look the way you wanted. And I didn't want to do the dull, boring part of, for color photography, rolling a drum back and forth and adding chemicals and controlling the temperature and doing things for a precise amount of time. I figured a computer could do that better. And I did that in high school, and did a science fair project, and I went to the National Science Fair in Canada with that project. So, and somebody said, hey, that would be that's a really good chemical engineering project. And I said, oh, I thought those guys just did math. Those engineer people. I'd never met one.
I didn't know what engineering was when I studying it either. I will admit, I just knew that if you are good at maths and science, maths and physics, then you should be an engineer. And so, okay, I'll be an engineer then. And then it turned out that previously I thought I wanted to be a physicist, but I only like physics up to about Newton. And then I just want to use the physics to solve problems. So, I mean, that really describes a mechanical engineer pretty much exactly. So I was lucky to have had good advice when I was a teenager.
The thing that put me off chemistry was somebody said, well, if you want to do something with chemistry, you need a PhD. And I said, no, that's just way too much school.
Yeah, it is too much school. Okay, I've got another question here. I don't know if it's one for you, Paul, but so Jim Bob asked, do I have any links to PTES design? I understand that systems are common in Denmark. And I think you mean pit thermal energy storage. I had to look it up, but assuming that that's what you mean. This is one of my big favorites of the energy transition, because it's one of those hard to abate things that people think is the gotcha for the energy transition, that, it's not as much solar power in winter, and in the northern hemisphere, in the northern hemisphere, that's when the peak energy demand is heating loads are much higher than electricity loads. And so it's like, aha, you'll never be able to solve this problem. But there is, there's technology, pit thermal energy storage, where they just get like a insulated swimming pool and just heat it up using usually solar power during the summer, and then they get that heat out as district heating usually during the winter. There's there's examples of projects in Canada and a lot in Scandinavia. And to answer your specific question before I hand over to Paul, so Jim, I did do a live stream on decarbonising heat with Glenn Ryan, who's a Western Australian guy with a thermal photovoltaic thermal technology that he's developing. And in that one, I'm pretty sure that I talk about some of the projects. The Canadian one, they've got really good data published on it, and it's above 90% efficiency throughout the year. So it's like, it sounds like you could never do that. Just put some hot water outside and then use it, heat it up in the summer, and then you're gonna it's still gonna be hot in the winter. But it does actually work really efficiently
when you get it big enough. This is one of these things that gets better and better with increased scale, because the surface area to volume ratio gets more and more favorable. So that's actually what the people are doing in this big condo project in Toronto, is a similar thing, except I don't think it's seasonal. I think it's more for electricity arbitrage. So, we get really super cheap electricity at night here because we built too many nuclear power plants. And you can turn them down, but you can't afford to turn them down because all the money's been spent on them. And hydro is very similar. Once you built the dam, you don't want to ever let water just go over the spillway, or not have water come out through the turbine, because you've spent all the money anyway. Why not make some money per kilowatt hour rather than making none? And for a nuclear power plant, they cost the same to not operate as they cost to operate, because most of the cost of operating them is people, and you can't send them home when they're not running. So anyway, we get cheap electricity at night, and I use it to charge my EV. And that's why I think everybody in Ontario should have an EV, because it dropped my cost per kilometer for energy to 64 Canadian cents per 100 kilometers. Because I charge it at night using this cheap nuclear and run-of-river hydro that we have. And these guys are just using it to, pump heat into this big pool of water and then pull it out when electricity is more expensive.
I think that's definitely something that is going to be, people are going to be taking advantage of that more in the future, instead of this like old-fashioned way of fossil fuel way of thinking of, you generate when you're going to generate, and then sorry, the opposite. In the past, it was like, whenever I want to use electricity, we're going to generate no matter what it costs. And in the future, we're going to go more into the opposite, to match and take advantage of cheap electricity.
Right. I think one of the key things that we want to do is we want to get rid of the brainlessness of the way that we use energy, but not by occupying our own brains with it more, but by getting software to take care of it for us. So, for instance, the example I give is I've got an electric dryer. Now, I really should have a heat pump dryer, but I don't. So, but the electric dryer, I can run on this really cheap electricity at 11:01 p.m., but it doesn't have a timer on it, and it's one of those ones that's really hard to make it, an external thing. I'd actually have to have a Bluetooth button pusher that would turn it on in order to make it run when I wanted to. So I have to go down and turn the dryer on. Well, it's obvious that you could build an appliance like a dryer where if somebody pushes the start button, on the little display, it comes up and it says, I'm going to start at 11:01 p.m. when electricity is cheap. But if you want me to start now, because you got to go somewhere, you need your clothes dry right this minute, then push the button again. And I'll use 24-cent kilowatt hour electricity instead of the 2.4 cent a kilowatt hour electricity. And that'll allow you to make your own choices, but the software will take care of it most of the time. And
that's how I think it's going to work too. But it's not the way it seems to be going in America. It's all about, you let us control your thermostat and we'll give you $50 a year. It's like, what? That's like totally missing the point. But anyway, I think this is where, I'm not a policy expert or a human behavior expert, and people who are more expert in that than me seem to think that's the way it should be done. So
I don't have a lot of expertise in either of those two regards either, but what I can say is that when given an opportunity, maybe it's because I'm cheap and I hate waste too, but when given an opportunity to save a bunch of money by behaving differently, I tend to behave differently.
So people have told me I'm too much of a geek, I'm too engaged, I don't know, I don't understand that most people don't care about saving money. But my response to that is always, whenever you see petrol or gas, I don't know what you call it, gas in Canada, right? Whenever you see it, it's 5 cents a litre cheaper somewhere, or 10 cents, so someone might save a few dollars on their tank, you will see big queues. People will drive across town to get that. And if there are so many people that are willing to go to those lengths for a few dollars, and it's actual effort of those as well, actual time of theirs that they're losing, as if people won't be prepared to just, get an app and schedule, what is convenient or inconvenient to them, and allow it to make the other decisions to save them money.
If the software it's going to go that way for you, and it's going to save you money. Money is freedom, right?
Yeah, and I get the early adopters will be geeks like you and me, but once people see how much money we're saving, then everyone will do it, I'm sure.
Well, I'm going for drinks with a friend of mine after the live stream today, and he and I, as a project for his 50th birthday, because he couldn't travel because of COVID. He couldn't do the big trip he wanted to do. So he and I built him a really cool home energy storage system, and he's kept adding to it and adding to it. So I think he'll be up to 48 kilowatt hours worth of lithium iron phosphate cells sometime around the end of March when our next order comes in. And he's got all this cool software that will, it looks at day ahead, how much solar there's going to be, and sets the parameters on his hybrid inverter that tells the system, well, okay, you want to target this much state of charge by this time of day, so that there's enough room in the batteries to soak up this solar, because it's going to be a good sunny day tomorrow, or no, it's going to be rainy. Solar is going to be terrible tomorrow. So I want to use that really cheap electricity at night in order to do arbitrage, so that, and then his home assistant turns off his heat pump and disable certain things to make sure that they aren't operating when the electricity is super expensive. So yeah, you think people call you a geek, they call me a geek. Scott, yeah, he's off the scale.
I think it's super cool, but I've been told I'm too engaged, so I don't know what I'm not able to to form a realistic view of the future because I'm too engaged, too excited about energy in a way that other people aren't. But anyway,
I'm too old to care what people think about that sort of thing anymore. So
this is back to the pit energy storage. Okay, so maybe this one isn't a pit specifically. It was boreholes in Canada, but this report, it's in the link to it is in that live stream that I did. Where was it? Back in, it was episode 9, and we're on 35 now, so it was sometime last year. Anyway, you can find it and find the link there, and it's really cool because it shows this report shows like a lot of details on how it works, and it shows the efficiency as well and how it kind of like charged up over the years. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then this is the Danish one, which is a pit. So that's the world's largest. Well, actually, I don't know what those last few words were when Danish is too rusty, but they have got swimming pool, dam kind of thing, and they're heating it up with concentrated solar thermal. So yes.
Yeah, I saw another one. I forget where it was. It was in Scandinavia somewhere. Oh, it was in Finland, where they had taken an old strategic oil storage cavern that was hewn into the rock, and they were using it as a thermal storage thing with their district heating system. They were charging it up just with simple electric boilers. Which seemed pretty clever. And again, same deal, doing arbitrage, to make energy cheaper for people.
But I think that's one thing that people miss, like heat. It's back to what we were saying before about, waste heat is really easy to come by because, it's really easy to waste heat and hard to turn it back into electricity. But if you only need heat, if you don't need electricity, then it's everywhere, and it actually is easier to store than you might think. Because I think everybody is thinking, like in terms of the daily experience, this is a coffee I was drinking just before I started, and this cup is cold to touch now. Like hot things cool down. Everyone knows that, and they cool down fast. It seems you can only get a thermos that'll hold your cup of tea hot till the end of the day. It seems totally ridiculous that you could do it seasonally, but when you get the big pit and it's nicely insulated, then you absolutely can. And because heat is we use more heat than we do use electricity. That's actually a really big part of the energy transition. And you don't need to think, oh, we're going to electrify all of that, and then we have to have electricity at exactly the same time as we need heat. And, peak heat load is 5 times often what peak electricity load is. So, massive problems, but you don't actually need to go through that path. I did want to also just get back to some comments and wrap up about that. I never know what to call it, demand response, or heard a new term for it that was better, but now I've forgotten it. Tom Dixon wants to know, is your friend Scott's software available anywhere?
No, it's something that he's kludged together from a bunch of different things. So unfortunately, no, I don't think Scott's going to go into the selling his home assistant system business.
But I don't know where you are. So
he runs a venture capital fund, by the way. That's his
okay. Well, maybe. So one of the hard things about these kinds of, like just a little bit of efficiency here, a little bit of better matching of supply and demand, and there's a lot of value there. A lot of electricity markets aren't set up to actually shift any of that value to the consumer, and Australia happens to be one place where it really is set up like that. So there's this company, RedEarth, who I talk about sometimes. I really like what they're doing. So they started off in off-grid systems, but now they've also got this product, the private power plant, the PPP, so like a virtual power plant, VPP, but on a personal scale. And it's so cool. You can just be, if you should have solar panels and maybe an EV, and a battery would be even better. But you can trade electricity because our electricity price varies, by 5 minutes actually. And if you sign up for the right plan, then you can be on a variable tariff as well that will reflect, like it'll be negative when there's a whole lot of solar power in the middle of the day, and it will spike up high when there's a real lack. And you can actually trade, you can be an energy trader and when you come home from work. And I know some people that have done it, and like they're watching the app and they're like, oh, there's an event. I've got to make sure. Like mostly it's automated so that it recognizes when these events are happening. But other times it's like, I must put a load of washing on now and the dryer and everything because I'm getting paid to use electricity right now. And yeah, I mean it's working. It's definitely pretty much for the geeks at the moment.
But the software
this is how I see it.
The software will make it not for the geeks, and that'll be really good.
Yeah, exactly. But if you want to, because people outside of Australia wouldn't know this if their market isn't set up to be able to use something like this. But take a look at RedEarth, what they're doing. I need to do a video with them one time. I know some of the guys there. But you can have a look. And this is how I imagine the future. And a lot of it is in getting the business case right. There's so much value there, but you need to make sure that the right people are getting the right parts of the value to make it, everyone want to participate. Yeah.
I'm accused of being flippant about some of these things, but I draw people back to their attention back to our little farm that we have east of the city. It's more or less a recreational property that we lease the fields out to a neighbor who farms them, and we enjoy the 28 acres of forest that's there. But there's no electricity there other than what we make and store on our own batteries. And of course, that made building a system really simple. We have panels are cheap, so we have enough panels to supply our wintertime demand, as much battery as we can afford. And then we have a gasoline generator that spends most of its time, I put more fuel through it, just making sure that it'll work when we need it. Then I run fuel through it to make electricity when I need it. It's just there for backup. So that to me is kind of a model of the future. We might need to have some kind of fuel burning appliance that's really low capital cost and hopefully not too hard to maintain. It doesn't have to be all that efficient, but it has a stored fuel and we use it in emergencies, and we do all this storage and renewables as our primary source for most of the time. And that's a perfectly acceptable thing. And the cool thing about our farm system is that we are without electricity a lot less frequently than our neighbors who are on the grid. Because out in the country, windstorms happen and trees fall on the power lines and they're without. And so our neighbors are running their gasoline generators all the time. And we almost never run ours. We just use the batteries and the
And
solar.
do you, because this is another kind of waste that I was hoping to get to, but we'll run out of time. Do you have more, like you've sized your solar panels based on your winter need or your summer need? Like, are you sizing it so that you never waste any solar power, or are you sizing it so that you always have enough?
I'm sizing it so that I waste almost all of my electricity because we produce way more in summer than we could ever need. And we use it to run refrigeration that we don't really need, but it's nice to have cold drinks and not have to run off to the store to buy bacon when we're up for the weekend. And in the winter, of course, we don't need refrigeration because we're below freezing the whole time. So these needs are seasonal. It's really not a big deal. It's pretty simple. And pretty brainless. And the only reason we have lots of panels is that panels are super cheap, especially if you buy the B grade ones that are aesthetically damaged.
Because I see a lot of people complain, smart people complaining, we curtailed 600 gigawatt hours of solar power in April, in California. And, that's devastating because, that should be used somewhere. But whilst, it would be good to use that, it's not smarter to, build enough batteries that you could store every electron of that, especially at this point now when we're still in low renewables penetration. Imagine scaling that up. Like, should we not have any more solar power at all because sometimes it's more than we can use? I mean,
it's so weird.
You would get way more bang for your buck buying more wind turbines, more transmission, more solar panels that will generate more the rest of the year when you're not maxed out. It's It's so crazy to start from the idea that we shouldn't waste anything. And it's not a goal in itself. You want the most efficient system, which is usually, economically constrained amongst a few other things.
Yeah, absolutely. You want a system that doesn't unnecessarily waste materials and embodied energy, but and money, of course, to pay for all those things. But you really don't cry any tears over spilled electrons. Like it really spilled sunlight. It really doesn't bother me at all. I don't think about it for a minute that the charge controllers just turn the panels completely off because battery's full.
But people are getting hot and bothered about it. And it surprises me. Like really smart people that are generally thinking systematically.
And then
definitely trying to figure out how to write a video on that.
Hydrogen to the rescue. The number of times I've heard people say, "Oh, well, we're just going to run the wind and solar that's beyond our needs into hydrogen." The stuff that would be otherwise curtailed. And then it's Bitcoin mining again. It's very much like that. It's the notion that, except the difference is that an electrolyzer is a lot more expensive. So running at 5% of its capacity factor is never affordable. It makes $100 a kilogram hydrogen. So there's no way that anybody's ever going to do that. It's just an excuse. It's not a real thing. You're not just going to run an electrolyzer ever on just the energy that would otherwise be curtailed. You can't even afford to run it on the entire output of a wind farm. That's not enough. You need sun too, and it has to be correlated in time negatively, right? So it's sunny when it's not windy, and vice versa. So anyway, fun stuff.
All right, there's a lot of good comments. I haven't got to them all. Some good energy efficiency projects that people have mentioned, but yeah, we've got to wrap up. You've got drinks to get to. So Christopher Sylvia says, put all the curtailed energy into CCS or direct air capture, which was one topic we didn't get to.
Sure. Except that stuff
suffers the same. Yeah, it suffers all suffers the same problem. You need something that doesn't cost much. You don't care about running 24/7, and there's almost nothing, no good loads like that. There's very few.
Now we are gonna put the best combination of wind and solar that we can into making products like ammonia and aluminum and direct reduced iron and all kinds of stuff in the best places in the world to do that. But we're going to use all of it. We're not going to, and the reason those places are the best places in the world, because by virtue of having wind anti-correlated with sun, is also because there's nobody anywhere nearby that needs electricity. Because otherwise, the thing to do with that is to give it to people that need electricity. Well, sell it, but that's the thing that makes sense. And of course, there are lots of places in the world where there are no people that need electricity, and yet they have this beautiful, abundant resource. That's where we're going to make ammonia and direct reduced iron and aluminum and magnesium and all these other things.
Yeah, Western Australia for the win.
Western Australia, well, South Australia too.
All right. Yeah, I mean, you look at the map, Western Australia is really good, and they've got the resources as well. I mean, all of Australia, but especially Western Australia, I would say. And so many topics that we've touched on that future videos. But yeah, my internet's starting to be less good as per usual. So good time to wrap up since we're over time anyway. But I just realized that I forgot to mention the sponsor of the video at the start. Sorry about that. But this video, like all the live streams, it's sponsored by WeatherGuard. WeatherGuard makes strike tape, which is a retrofittable lightning protection system for things that go fast, like wind turbine blades and aircraft. And they also have a great tech newsletter and podcast, which I co-host with Alan Hall and Joel Saxum and Phil Totaro from Intel Store each week. The latest one we did on drone inspection certification, and also Blade Robots has spun off from investors, and there's a few other topics. So make sure to sign up for the tech news and podcast. And yeah, thanks so much, Paul. I mean, I think we could probably talk for 10 hours and we wouldn't have got through everything. So
we could do that. And one thing that I always leave people with at the end, I will say things in talks like this in the interest of time that just sound like I'm, blurting something out with no evidence behind it at all. If you want to find out why I think the things that I do, there are two good places to go. One of them is spitfireresearch.com, but the most up-to-date place, because I'm lazy and don't keep my blog on Spitfire Research up to date, is LinkedIn, where I've got 55, I think, articles now. And the really cool thing about that is that they're not like technical papers, where they're a stake driven in the sand for the next 20 years, and people don't go back and fix them when they're no longer valid. The LinkedIn articles are constantly updated, fresh information, and people like Dave Smith find my math errors and point them out to me, and I fix them. And it's really good. So go there, and then you'll find out why I believe. And if you don't think I've got it right, argue with me about it, please. I want to get it right. I don't care about being right. I want to get the thing right. That's most important to me.
Yeah, it's a really good resource. And also, yeah, if you are, one of the other good things about LinkedIn is that you do get a dialogue from usually not only experts, but there'll usually be a few experts in there. And you can find out what's the real disagreements in the field. I'm often going to LinkedIn, and especially your LinkedIn, for research about new videos. So yeah, definitely recommend that. Want to just respond to one comment because it's obvious. A eclectic cyclist says to me, time to consider Starlink, and I absolutely have. I tried a new kind of wireless internet. It worked worse than the one I've got currently. Can't get Starlink because we've rent, and the landlord won't let us put it on the roof, and on the balcony wasn't good enough. I did the little app test. So I've got to move. I've got to get proper internet. One day I will do that, but today was better than normal. So okay, I'll take that. I'll take that small win. But yeah, thanks so much. And people watching the replay afterwards, or people watching now, let me know what's the next thing that you want next time that Paul's on, and I don't know, 6 months time or something. What would be the next thing? So I think we kept it pretty thematically good with, like, it was about waste basically. I might update the title to reflect that. What would be the next theme that we could
even if people don't want to hear about it? I want to talk about what I talked to Dave Borlace about, and I know that you're interested in Rosie, which is this stupid notion that people have that when we stop burning fossil fuels, we won't be able to make plastics and chemicals anymore. We'll have to make them from biomass, which is just dumb.
Or that we have to get rid of plastics made from petrochemicals because of climate change. That's the other thing. People really think that, but it's like
wrong.
Carbon atoms are durably there. Yeah. Anyway, we've got to get going. Got to let you go. Got to let all the viewers go.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone watching. Really great questions today. Too many really good ones to show, which is a good problem to have. So yeah, thanks, and see you next time.
All right. Bye.